Look, we're currently witnessing one of the most massive structural shifts in modern financial history. It's a metamorphosis that has quietly, almost invisibly, turned a historically cash-reliant nation into the world's absolute gold standard for digital-first transactions. So in this explainer, we're going to break down how a digital sovereign is taking shape right in front of us, and how it's fundamentally rewiring the mechanics and, honestly, the geopolitics of global finance.
But to really grasp the macroeconomics at play here, we kind of need to start at the absolute ground level. Picture this. You're buying a simple 10 rupee cup of tea at a roadside stall. Now, just a few short years ago, this tiny microtransaction carried a ton of physical friction. You'd be fumbling for crumpled paper notes, digging around for exact change. It was slow, entirely disconnected from the digital grid, and frankly, it kept the vendor completely invisible to the formal economy.
Okay, let's dive into this, because today, at that exact same roadside stall, all that friction, it's just gone. Instead, you'll find a printed QR code hanging from a simple piece of string. It might be battered by the weather, sure, but it works perfectly. You just scan it with your phone, and boom, those 10 rupees are instantly transferred directly from your bank account to the vendors. No point-of-sale terminal, no monthly hardware fees, just a seamless, instant digital transfer in a fraction of a second.
Now that single cup of tea is just one tiny data point in a reality that is mathematically staggering. In June 2025 alone, the system running these transfers processed 18.4 billion transactions. 18.4 billion. Just take a second to let the sheer weight of that number actually sink in. That's roughly 7,000 individual financial transfers executing perfectly every single second, day and night. We're talking about a scale of financial throughput that's literally forcing economists to tear up and recalibrate their models.
And the momentum behind this system, the Unified Payments Interface, or UPI, is almost unprecedented in modern economic history. When it launched back in 2016, it processed just 20 million transactions in its entire first fiscal year. Fast forward to 2023, it blasted past the 10 billion monthly mark, and by 2025, it hit that 18.4 billion figure. That is a nearly 12,000-fold surge in volume in exactly 1 decade. It's a velocity of adoption that legacy global financial systems just don't, and honestly probably can't replicate.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the secret to all this macro dominance actually lies at the very bottom of the economic pyramid. Look at this. A massive 86% of all person-to-merchant transactions are for amounts under 500 rupees. The entire engine of this network is being relentlessly driven from the ground up. It's the micropayments. You know, daily groceries, fast food, incredibly small commute fares. That is what's fueling this revolution. It's high-frequency, low-value commerce operating at a scale that's never been digitized before.
And this has forced a complete paradigm shift for the working class. Back in the cash-heavy days, small street vendors and local shopkeepers, the kiranas, were largely unbanked and economically invisible. But today, UPI has inadvertently built the world's largest merchant network, hooking in over 65 million active small businesses. Why does this matter? Well, because even a 10 rupee payment leaves a digital footprint, these micro merchants are suddenly building robust credit histories. They're finally escaping predatory local moneylenders and accessing formal, low-interest banking capital to actually grow their businesses.
So how exactly was this achieved? Well, we have to recognize the massive paradigm shift this represents for statecraft. The IMF actually categorizes this tech not just as software, but as digital public infrastructure, or DPI. And the core philosophy here is completely revolutionary. Foundational digital systems, like the rails that verify your identity or let you move money, should be treated as essential public goods. Think about it. Just like a government doesn't charge you a toll every time you step onto a public sidewalk, basic digital rails are now being treated identically to physical roads or power grids.
Of course, UPI didn't just emerge in a vacuum. It sits squarely within a much larger architectural foundation known as the India Stack, which is built on 3 strictly interoperable pillars. First up is the identity layer, driven by Aadhaar. That's a biometric ID system covering 1.4 billion people, and it literally drops banking onboarding costs from dollars down to mere pennies. Second is the payments layer, that's UPI itself, handling real-time transfers. And third is the data governance layer, which uses account aggregators so users can securely share their own financial data to get loans. The real genius here? They are all seamlessly interconnected.
And this brings us to a pretty harsh clash of business models. On one side, you've got UPI,
aggressively treated as a public utility with a strictly enforced zero merchant discount rate for basic transfers, meaning it costs the merchant absolutely nothing to accept it. On the flip side, you have traditional credit card networks. These are heavily centralized private networks driven by rent-seeking interchange fees, usually extracting between 1.5% and 3.0% from the merchant on every single swipe. It is the stark difference between a public economic accelerant and a fee-driven corporate toll booth.
And this brilliantly illustrates the technological genius of the system, its open interoperability. It totally shattered the walled gardens of traditional fintech. Check this out. 1. A customer can scan any QR code, regardless of who printed it. 2. They can use whatever third-party app they prefer, Google Pay, PhonePe, Paytm, you name it. And 3. The money settles instantly between two completely distinct, unconnected banks. Basically, the state built an open protocol that forces private companies to talk to one another, completely wiping out platform monopolies.
Now, this public infrastructure model has resulted in a remarkably quiet coup on the global financial stage. By 2025, the domestic Indian UPI network officially surpassed the legacy global titan, Visa, in daily transaction volume. Yeah, you heard that right. UPI is effortlessly handling over 640 million transactions a day, just edging past Visa's 639 million. But here's the kicker. While legacy global networks are still operating on these archaic 1- or 2-day batch processing cycles, literally holding merchant capital hostage for up to 48 hours, UPI is settling every single microtransaction in absolute real time.
Honestly, from a macroeconomic perspective, the irony here is just exquisite. Imagine spending half a century and tens of billions of dollars meticulously constructing this sprawling, highly optimized global toll road empire. You perfect the toll booths, you calculate the absolute maximum friction you can charge the drivers, and then a sovereign state just comes along and quietly paves a completely frictionless, phenomenally efficient, and entirely free superhighway right next to it. That is the deeply disruptive reality that Western payment titans are scrambling to navigate right now.
And the resulting scale? It borders on the incomprehensible. According to rigorous industry and IMF data we're looking at here, India's domestic UPI network now accounts for nearly 49% of all real-time digital payments worldwide, almost half. Let that sink in. One single, domestically engineered system is processing roughly half of the real-time digital payment volume currently happening on planet Earth.
But here's where the geopolitics really kick in. This infrastructure is no longer confined to India's borders. It's evolved into a formidable geopolitical export, a true digital sovereign extending its strategic reach. UPI is already live in 8 international markets. It's accepted seamlessly at major merchant terminals across the UAE. It successfully linked its rails with Singapore's PayNow system. It's made its first European bridgehead into France and is deeply integrated into the cross-border economies of Sri Lanka and Nepal.
So what does this actually represent on the world stage? Well, particularly synthesized during India's G20 presidency, it's become a highly attractive new blueprint for the global south. For decades, developing nations really had no choice but to lock themselves into super expensive proprietary software, essentially surrendering their citizens' financial data to Silicon Valley or Wall Street monopolies. But now, digital public infrastructure is being offered as an open-source, non-aligned development accelerator. It promises economic modernization, but without the loss of digital sovereignty.
Economic researchers are increasingly calling this architecture the middle way, and it's really a masterclass in market design. The government builds the foundational state-backed public rails, which guarantees systemic stability, zero-cost access, and strict interoperability. Then they take a step back and let the private sector fiercely innovate on top of those rails. This has led to incredible hardware innovations, like those ubiquitous audio sound boxes you see everywhere, loudly announcing "payment successful" over the noise of a crowded market, instantly reassuring a busy vendor. Basically, the state paves the roads, and highly capitalized private tech companies build the cars.
So as we process the sheer statistical gravity and this rapid international expansion of UPI, we're left confronting a massive structural pivot in the global economy. Here's the big question to take away from this explainer. Does the future of global finance and the immense power of digital data that comes with it belong to closed, walled private networks engineered to extract transaction fees? Or does it ultimately belong to open, interoperable digital public infrastructure managed as a sovereign right? It's a fascinating question, and one that will undoubtedly dictate the architecture of money for the next century.